Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining. Just waiting for folks to trickle in here. Hi, Nestor. How are you?
Hey, good. How's it going?
It's going pretty well. Looks like we had a couple of technical issues initially here, but we've
No
got everyone
worries.
online. We've got the attendees trickling in. We've got you on
Good.
our
Okay.
you on our webinar. We're going to wait one more minute and
Okay. Sounds great.
give folks the opportunity to join us today. Definitely lots of exciting stuff for us to talk about. I want to make sure that these folks don't miss it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
I'll go ahead and I'll make sure that our screen share is working here.
Yeah, it looks like it's working for me, so it should be good.
Awesome. All right. Hopefully everyone is able to see our title card here and not my notes, but we'll go ahead and we'll get this webinar started. I've been waiting for this for quite some time, so I'm excited for you all to be joining us today for a deep dive into the 2025 Stanford High AI Index Report. I'm Harvey Raniola. I'm the head of marketing here at Quid. And for today's agenda, we will introduce our speaker. I introduced him briefly to an extent for those of you who joined a little bit earlier. For those of you who are not familiar with Quid, we'll give you a quick rundown about exactly what Quid does. And then right after that, we'll go right into Nestor's presentation, the Stanford High, as well as the AI Index report for this year. And then we'll close out our webinar with a Q&A session. And so with that, I have the pleasure of introducing to you our speaker for today, Nestor Maslej. He is the lead researcher at Stanford High. Nestor, thank you so much for joining us and being willing to come back after doing this with us last year.
Yeah, it's awesome to be here. It's super to speak to your group of the people in the Quid network, and I'm very excited to be presenting today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're really looking forward to the presentation. So for the folks who are not familiar with Quid, exactly what is Quid? We do have it on the screen in plain English, but essentially we are a recommendations engine. We identify consumer trends. We help folks to understand what's coming around the corner for them. What are things that they need to be proactive about and to implement into their strategies to ensure that we're meeting their business outcomes. We do want to make sure that we're recommending, that we're helping folks to be strategic in how they implement these recommendations. And exactly how do we do that? Well, what we do is we access billions of data sources to be able to tap into petabytes of data. And so we're able to scale a lot of these primary or even secondary research projects that folks are typically accustomed to. And we're able to do so at a much larger scale. We ingest this data into our proprietary AI, custom models that we're creating, and we have some amazing outcomes engineers that look through this data. They prioritize the insights based on the business outcomes of our customers, and we suggest different actions for them to take. And we have a number of really great examples that we encourage you to take a look at in our case study section of our site. And what you'll see in that case study section is that we work with a number of great customers across different industries all over the globe. And so we'd love it if after this webinar, if you haven't already done so, if you're not one of our current customers, for you to take the opportunity to speak to a Quid expert so that we could learn more about your own business outcomes and we could show you exactly how we can help you to be able to achieve it. So I promised to a couple of folks that I'll keep that commercial brief, but I'll go ahead and I'll hand it back off to Nestor to give us a deep dive into this year's report. Really exciting, and there's so much good stuff in there that obviously being able to bring on board Nestor as the domain expert in this report to be able to share his insights into it. We're all very excited to be able to give you this time. So Nestor, I'll go ahead and I'll hand it off to you.
Perfect. All right, so I should be sharing my screen. Yeah, super stoked to be speaking to this audience. And I mean, the AI index is a pretty big and pretty meaty report. So Today, what I'm going to try to do is really focus on, I think, on trends that we're seeing that are relevant to industry folks. I think that's a really good way of maybe kind of focusing what we do. Want to talk a little bit about what the index is. So, the index is an annual report on trends in AI that comes out of the University of Stanford. It's currently in its eighth edition, and it's a report that aims to track, distill, and visualize key information on trends in AI. And it was created in 2017 by a diverse committee of AI thought leaders, people like Jack Clark, who's one of the co-founders of Anthropic, James Manica, who currently is heading all research activities at Google, and Eric Brynjolfsson, who I would say is one of the world's leading AI economists. And these individuals got together in 2017 because they understood as far back as then that AI was going to be a real game-changing technology, and that as such, it was going to be valuable to have some kind of report that really could kind of speak in tangible terms to what's happening with the tech, how it's evolving, how it's growing, how it's changing. And that's exactly what we try to do in the report. Now, of course, to make the report possible, we're partnering with a lot of data vendors across the globe. And these are some of the ones that we work with. And I'll give a special shout out to Quid. I haven't put them on the screen here, but just to say that we've been in the AI index business now for, I think, 8 iterations. Quid has basically been there from the beginning. They're one of our most trusted partners. They're a data vendor that we've worked to really kind of expand the coverage of what we look at and what we consider. And we're someone that is deeply appreciative of the relationship that we have with them. And in fact, we even list them in the report as one of our supporting partners. And the index is been able to have been covered by newspapers across the globe, by governments and government agencies across the globe, and increasingly now we've also briefed businesses across the globe. And I think this is really reflective of the fact that AI as a technology is something that is being considered by policymakers in parliaments, business leaders in boardrooms, and really kind of average people in kitchen tables across the globe. And I think in a lot of ways, it's the mission of the index to empower those conversations so that people can understand what exactly is happening with the tech. Now, with that, let's actually get into some of the top takeaways of the report. Now, first and foremost is simply the fact that AI performance is continuing to improve. If you look at, for example, mid-journey generations over time of Harry Potter, you can kind of see just how much better the tech has gotten. And one of the things that we did at the index is we asked one of the first versions of Mid-Journey that came out in February of 2022, all the way to one of the more recent versions that came out in July of 2024 to give us the generation for this prompt. And you can see in this slide the tremendous progress that we've seen. I mean, on the left, you almost have what looks like a Picasso-esque, cubist rendition of a tortured Harry Potter. On the right, you almost have to squint very closely to see that that is not, in fact, Daniel Radcliffe. And I think we're kind of now in more tangible terms at a moment in the ecosystem where we don't really find that there's a lot of benchmarks left on which AI systems are trailing human performance. This chart is looking at how well these AI systems do on a variety of benchmarks or metrics of AI performance and AI competency. And you'll notice that on most of these benchmarks, these AI systems are kind of exceeding the performance of humans. And on even some of the newer, more recent benchmarks that have been proposed, like GPQA, MMLU, and SWE-bench, these are all benchmarks that have been launched in the last year with the explicit purpose of really testing and pushing these systems. We've seen massive improvements in very short periods of time. Another big question that people ask geopolitically, who's leading the AI race? Well, our data suggests that while the US still leads in producing top AI models, China's really closing the performance gap. If you look at the number of notable AI models by select geographic areas, there are more notable models that are coming from the US than any other country in the world. But the thing that's really changed is that the quality of Chinese models in the last year has really caught up. If you look at some of these benchmarks like LMSIS, these kinds of public leaderboards that are trying to evaluate how well these models do, how well they score, you'll notice that there's roughly a 100-point delta in January of 2024 And this delta kind of has shrunk to basically less than 30 points in February of 2025. So there's been a massive improvement in the quality of available Chinese models. And I think that's really led to a changing thought process in the minds of a lot of businesses on what models they should actually be deciding to build with. Now, in the responsibility landscape, we also find that the RAI world is evolving in a rather uneven way. And one of the ways, and you can see this, is if you look at general capabilities benchmarks, these are benchmarks that are looking at what these models are generally capable of doing. You'll notice that although there is a consensus for virtually every single major model developer in general capabilities, things like MMLU, GPQA, things that are looking at how well these models can do college level reasoning or scientific reasoning. Every single developer is testing these models. There really is no consensus for responsible AI benchmarks. You have some developers testing on some benchmarks, others still on others, and the result is ultimately a very kind of fragmented, disjointed, and kind of, frankly, uneven ecosystem. And this has a lot of implications for businesses because if businesses are thinking about making decisions about which models to build with, they really kind of now are in a position where they need to kind of think tangibly, think carefully, and think in a rather focused way of what models are going to give them value and what models are not necessarily going to be as valuable and potentially as safe as others. On that point as well, there's a pretty big delta between the organizations that are acknowledging RAI risks and then the mitigation efforts that are actually being taken. So virtually every single organization is reporting that they consider risks to be more relevant than they're actively taking steps to mitigate these risks. And this is evidence of the fact that I think responsible AI as a broad category is still very early on. A lot of organizations are still in the very early days of AI governance, and that has a lot of kind of important implications for how the space might evolve and develop. Now, fortunately, policymakers across the globe, they've definitely kind of stepped up. They have certainly shown a demonstrated interest in RAI. And one of the ways in which you see this is the fact that across the globe in the last little while, there's been a notable increase in responsible AI policymaking milestones. And these milestones have been passed by kind of organizations across the globe and different kind of stakeholder groups across the globe. There's also a valuable kind of public policy thing to think about here, which is that globally we find that AI optimism is rising, but despite this, deep regional divides still really remain. So if you look at, for example, data from Ipsos on the number of products and services using AI, do people think that products and services using AI have more benefits than drawbacks? You'll notice that for most of the countries in the sample, there is more agreement with that statement now than there was 2 years ago. So AI optimism is rising, and it's rising especially in a lot of these countries like Germany, United States, and Canada that previously were quite negative about the technology. Still, that optimism kind of pales in comparison with that in countries like China, Saudi Arabia, and Indonesia, where there's just substantially more bullishness about the tech. Now, this is important because how different people feel about AI across the globe is going to be very important in actually determining how AI as a technology is rolled out and used by different stakeholders. Now, perhaps one of the more important trends that we see is that AI as a whole is just becoming a lot more efficient, affordable, and accessible. I think personally, this is one of the most important charts from the 2025 AI Index report, and this is looking at how much it costs to use AI systems across select levels of intelligence. So, for example, the dark blue line on the left, that is looking at how much it costs to use a model with the intelligence of GPT 3.5. GPT 3.5, of course, is one of the first models upon which ChatGPT was built. And you'll notice that you basically go from a cost of roughly $20 per million tokens in November of 2022 all the way to 7 cents per million tokens in November of 2024. There's been a massive decrease in the cost of these AI systems, and that's really reflective of the fact that they're just getting cheaper, the hardware is getting better, and you're getting smaller and smaller models, as you see on this chart, that are delivering better and better performance. NVIDIA especially has released a lot more GPUs like the H100 and the A100, which are just firing much more rapidly. You can get a lot more out of them, and that's driving massive performance increases. The accessibility that we're also seeing the rise in it is also being driven by better performance of open weight models. Last year, this was a big story in the AI world that open weight models really kind of lagged behind closed weight models in terms of their performance capabilities. That really no longer is the case. We're kind of now at a moment in which a lot of these open weight systems are doing incredibly well. And that again is changing how businesses are thinking about some of the tech. Now, still, we're kind of at a moment in the ecosystem, despite this greater accessibility, industry is still really kind of leading the charge. Most notable AI models are coming from industry, very few are coming from academia. And that's really tied with massive frontier training costs. So, to train a frontier AI system, you need anywhere nowadays from 40 to $200 million. And that is obviously pricing out universities and a lot of non-industrial actors in the space. Still, the frontier is becoming more competitive. If you look at some of these benchmarks, you'll notice that we're now at a moment in the ecosystem where there's 7 major developers, all of which have models that are pretty good and pretty close in terms of their performance. So the space is competitive. And I think looking forward, I'm very curious to see next year who's going to be leading this particular race. What models are businesses going to decide to use, and what models are businesses going to decide to build with? Now, we also have some industry highlights in the report that speak specifically to kind of trends that we're seeing in the industrial landscape. So, one of the biggest trends, and this is again where Quid has been super useful, is looking at trends in private investment data. And I think, this chart speaks for itself. Another super critical one, there's just substantially more private investment in AI now than there was in 2022. We go from roughly kind of 5 billion in total investment in 2022 all the way to 34 billion in 2024. And when you look at some of these investment trends, it's really clear that there's kind of a pretty significant geographic disparity. You have certain countries like the United States that are kind of massively outstripping and outperforming other geographic regions like Europe and China in terms of total AI investment. Also, we kind of really see that the use of AI in business context is also climbing to unprecedented levels. So, if you look at, for example, the share of respondents who say that their organizations use AI in at least one function, we're going from roughly 20% of respondents in 2017 all the way to 80% in 2024. So, this number is going through the roof. There are more and more people that are using AI, thinking about it, and really trying to leverage it for positive business usage. And I think part of the reason that you see this kind of massive business uptake of this technology is that there's now a lot of research that's coming out of the academy that speaks to how AI boosts productivity. You could look at research that Eric Brynjolfsson has done that looks at the impact of AI on customer support agents. Those agents that use AI are more productive than those that do not. You can look at research that speaks to scientific improvement and discovery with AI systems. This research really is suggesting to us that AI does move the needle on things from a productivity perspective, and this productivity impact is something that businesses are really keeping their eye on. A lot of these studies on the productivity impacts of AI, they also seem to be suggesting that AI might have an equalizing effect. That across these different studies, whether it's customer support, consulting, or software engineering, AI seems to really kind of level up the performance of low-skilled workers substantially more than higher skilled workers. So it's not to say that the high skilled workers eventually get outstripped by the lower skilled ones. At the end of the day, they still perform better, but the lower skilled ones see their performance improve a lot more as a result of these AI systems. We're also finding that when it comes to responsible AI, a lot of these responsibility concerns are also kind of changing and evolving over time. There are certain things like privacy and data related risks, reliability risks, compliance and lawfulness risks that are becoming more and more salient with every passing year. But I think one of the biggest kind of risk vectors that we're seeing massive increases in is financial risks. So if you look at, for example, ROI and questions of are you getting value from AI, this seems to be one of the biggest things that organizations are really thinking about when it comes to rolling out their AI systems. And I think to kind of close off here, it kind of leads to a really interesting meditation of what does this potentially mean for workforce sizes, right? You can imagine different things happening that AI is going to lead to more people being employed because maybe we're kind of freeing people up from drudgery so we could do more meaningful things. On the other hand, if AI is going to have massive automating effects, then workforce sizes are really going to kind of decrease pretty precipitously. Now, we don't have a lot of good data at the index that really kind of speaks to how workforce sizes are changing as a result of AI. But interestingly, data that looks at predictions about AI, so this is McKinsey survey data that is asking people, what expectation do you think that AI is going to have on organizational workforce sizes in the next 3 years? You'll find that although most people are still predicting a decrease, the amount that are predicting a decrease has actually gone down. So it seems to be that more people are kind of, let's say, less pessimistic about the thought of AI taking all of our jobs. That's going to be an increasingly important thing to look at. So the AI index is quite long, 500 pages. I've tried to kind of trim it down here, and I've intentionally kind of structured this webinar so we have some questions built in from the audience, from people that are interested about different points. Again, the index is really a collaborative effort. We've been lucky to kind of work with Quid over the years. And I think one of our top charts every single year is how much investment is flowing into AI. That comes courtesy of Quid. If you want to get more data that looks at how investment trends are changing, both geographically, but also in terms of what types of AI sub-focuses people are actually investing in, Quid has a lot of excellent data on that as well, which is featured in the report. So happy to kind of shift over to the audience now and maybe take some questions if you guys have any about what you might be wondering is occurring in the space of AI.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for walking us through that, Nestor. And it's a very comprehensive report. So I do encourage all of you in attendance, if you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, it's quite meaty, but at the same time, over the last couple of years, actually, I believe since the beginning, they have made sure to include key takeaways right at the start. And so if you have a specific focus area that you want to be able to deep dive into a little bit further, that could be one way to navigate the report and not be as intimidated by all the amazing insights that are surfaced as part of what Nestor and his team have written up. So while we're waiting for audience questions, I know I mentioned earlier that you and we had an opportunity to discuss previous reports as well. Last year, you and I we had an on-demand webinar that we ended up doing where we discussed some of the more interesting points. One of the areas that I do remember us talking about, and something that I wanted to ask you about, this is a little bit more of a broader question here, is I did ask you about whether or not AI applications, if they continue this exponential rate of growth that we've seen over the last couple of years, it certainly seems like on the investment side of things that there is still this boom. One of the charts that you were just showing us showed a pretty significant jump just year over year in terms of investment, specifically in the United States. But your response when I asked you that question last year in terms of just the growth in AI in general was that we haven't quite figured out yet just what the application challenge of AI is, specifically around businesses. Seems like you may have changed your tune on that, but where do you currently stand on where we are in better understanding what the applications of AI are, specifically in business?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is, I think strategically businesses just kind of need to do the work to actually figure out what AI could do for them, right? And I mean, I think sometimes people have this conception that AI is just a chatbot. I mean, it's obviously a lot more than that. It could do a lot more for you. And the analogy that I like to use is AI is almost like a source of electricity, it's a source of energy, and your business needs to build the wiring to figure out how it could use that to be more productive. But I think that takes some kind of humility and stepping back and figuring out like, okay, what are we doing as a business and how can AI serve that function even more? And I mean, I think there's companies that have come out that have tried to answer the application layer, but sometimes, businesses need to build products themselves or build applications themselves that could do some of that work. So I think we've seen more and more progress there. But I mean, we're still very early days, but that's a very typical narrative with new technology. It usually takes us a pretty substantial period of time to get technology to the level where it is sufficient enough to be driving massive productivity growth and massive productivity changes.
Right. I do see a question from the audience, but I'm going to be a little bit self-serving here and ask a follow-up question to that because one of the interesting charts that you showed earlier as well, or at least discussion points that you talked about, was the McKinsey study.
Yeah.
It was tied to one of the charts, but also just in terms of the predictions about the impact on the workforce and how in revised assessments of what the future could potentially look like in terms of impact on workforce, it seems like people are a little bit more optimistic about how AI isn't going to be taking their jobs essentially, or the jobs of their team members. Do you think that that played a little bit of a part in terms of businesses trying to better understand how to apply AI in its, numerous forms to the way that they operate as businesses? Or, I guess going back to some of the things that you were just talking about as well, is just kind of a lack of understanding and not really necessarily knowing how it's relevant to them and their operations.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of businesses, I think you can kind of see in the abstract how AI does move the needle productivity wise, but whenever a new technology comes around, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on reskilling people, figuring out how to actually use it in operations. So I think some of it is, yeah, people don't really know what you could fully do with it. And in a lot of cases, businesses might not have the infrastructure to leverage it, right? If you're a business that's been collecting data, not only collecting data, but actually processing it in a way that's clean and can be, for example, used to fine-tune an AI system, then you'll get a lot more out of AI than a business that has not been doing that. So I think that there is this thing where businesses still need to do a lot of this work, kind of figuring things out. But I think some businesses are realizing, hey, like, we give AI to our workers, they're solving stuff that, would have taken them, 5 days to do. They're now doing it in a
Yeah.
few days. And they can reinvest that time to now kind of pursue other more productive projects and more productive ventures. So the nature of work is definitely changing, but I don't think, we're going to necessarily be working any less in the future, maybe marginally less, but I think humans historically have been very good at finding ways to make themselves busy.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree. And to me, the most exciting part of this is like you implied, efficiency gains, being able to do more, and not necessarily the fear that AI is eventually going to come and take my job. Although the consulting stat there was very interesting, just in terms of the performance lift for that
Yeah.
particular industry. I'll get to this question over here. So, unfortunately, it's an anonymous attendee. I wish you would have typed in exactly who you were, but on your behalf, here's a question. There's an abundance of training opportunities in AI as of today, which is great, including those through LinkedIn Learning, Coursera, Google, etc., as well as those offered by individual schools and employers. Do you have any particular programs that you'd highly recommend if we'd like to identify 1 to 3 of them?
Yeah, I mean, this is a lot of work that I do with businesses. I do like executive education work for them to kind of help them understand how the space is evolving and changing. I mean, there's a lot of good resources online, a lot of good people. I mean, there's a startup that I actually work with. They're called Readocracy, and they have this program called Thinking Through AI. I've just linked that in the chat. It's basically an application that helps you navigate different, let's say, kind of thought leaders in the AI ecosystem and what they're posting about it. I really like them because, they do typically very nice work kind of curating and making the kind of AI education journey a little bit more scalable. But I think it really depends on what you're trying to do because AI is a pretty big thing and there's a lot of different things you could do. And, there are different kind of thought leaders that could help you understand different things when it comes to AI. But thinking through AI is a nice platform because it's kind of custom built to basically curate information that is relevant for you and valuable for you. So, I mean, I work them. I would definitely kind of check it out, but it looks like a lot of people are also kind of thinking about those things as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the recommendations. All right. See a couple more questions coming in. One thing I did want to ask about leading up to this webinar and some of our prep sessions also was I know that we have a couple of folks who are going to be joining or who are joining who may be in retail or commerce backgrounds and who are curious about the specific question. But in looking at the report, and we're looking specifically at some of the areas around the industries and how different industries leveraged AI. If I remember correctly, there's a section there about responsible AI, specifically around facial recognition. Um, but in general, just thinking about that as one of the applications from a retail perspective, and that's specifically to brick and mortar, retail in itself didn't seem like they were invested heavily or investing heavily in AI and adoption in retail wasn't as um, expansive as some of the other industries that were represented in the data that you guys presented. So just curious about what your thoughts are there and just the, possibilities. I feel like in conversations leading up to this webinar as well, even with colleagues internally, we're just thinking about things like potentially having something along the lines of virtual shoppers for customers when folks are coming to these commerce or clothing sites and not seeing anything like that in place. It just seems like there's a big opportunity there. But what do you think is holding them back? Where's the reluctance in that specific industry that we're not seeing in some of the others that are more willing to adopt AI?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, I think one of it is kind of on the strategic level that I think sometimes, retail is kind of is there it's run by a lot of kind of big consumers and big players. And I think sometimes for those big companies, there could be a reluctance to embrace some of the new technology because, it can be hard to know like if there isn't a really good playbook on how to use it, how are you actually going to kind of run with it and leverage it and do different things with it? And I think that's kind of what it is with retail, where there's a lot of different things you could theoretically imagine AI doing, but then how are you actually going to design some kind of, again, application, coming back to the first question, that is going to do some of these kind of imaginative future things that you want to be doing. But I do get the impression that it's starting to change. I've personally worked with a few retail clients that are becoming a little bit more kind of bullish and optimistic about using AI. And I think we're going to see some exciting applications kind of in the pipe in the near future.
Awesome. What I took out of that, obviously, there was a lot of great insight there, but I was also thinking for the marketing team over here, I think one of the things that we need to add to action items moving forward and as takeaways from this webinar is that we need a playbook for retail
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a,
AI.
it's a different playbook for different kind of verticals and different segments because again, AI isn't just a product that's the same for everybody. Depending on what business you're doing, who you're trying to target, you're going to want to be using the technology in different ways. So, working with organizations like Quid that are actually kind of, I think, vetting their strategic guidance in data is a very good way to go because it definitely kind of helps people get a good perspective about what needs to happen and how things need to develop.
Right. Awesome. All right. Moving away from my questions here, I'm going to field one from Akshay Singh. His question is that most of the investment in AI is happening in the US and in China. What are some other AI hotspots outside of these countries, especially from a business adoption perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a lot of good business adoption data. That's one of the, I think, my big laments at the index is it would be nice if there was a really kind of wide cross-country representative survey that looked at kind of trends in AI business. I think we're working on that and would certainly love to kind of feature that more and include that more. I would say for me, kind of big picture. I think the UAE and Saudi Arabia and the Middle East as a whole is really trying to kind of take a step forward with AI. I mean, they've just launched a lot of kind of AI investment projects. This is something they're kind of deeply thinking about and deeply kind of committed to. And I think this is going to be an area of kind of tremendous growth and kind of tremendous opportunity in the near future. So that's definitely kind of an area that I would keep an eye out on. And they've already done some really exciting things. And I think they're really trying to take a big leap forward with the technology.
So makes a lot of sense. There's quite a bit of money over there. So them identifying this as an opportunity for growth and investment, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, Uh, Looking at some of the questions that we had in preparing for this webinar, and me maybe showing off that I was doing a little bit more homework here and taking information from the report and forming questions out of them. But um, the second top takeaway in the report is about how much AI has encroached into everyday life, even
Yeah.
when we don't know it. It's kind of just there. We take it for granted in many instances. But the report does specifically mention how AI-enabled medical devices, how many of them were approved by the FDA in 2023 compared to 2015. And it was a pretty big jump, right? So just recalling my notes, back in 2015, it was six medical devices, AI-enabled medical devices. In 2023, it was 223. So massive jump
Yeah.
there, just in terms of, obviously technology evolves over time, but then it seems like they're much more open to being able to enable medical professionals to leverage these technologies. But throughout the report itself, there are a number of different applications in the medical space that are alluded to. It also shows that medical and healthcare was in the top three in terms of the total AI related investments in 2024. That was $11 billion. I'm assuming continue to grow significantly since then. I was talking about and asking about retail earlier, which is at the bottom end of that chart. But as adoption of AI continues to grow, what are your views on balancing innovation and specifically in a medical context, balancing that with patient consent and being transparent with this data in medical researchers? I know that we here at Quid, we work with a number of pharmaceutical customers, and this is something that's likely top of mind for them. But what are your thoughts around being able to strike this balance and obviously extracting the right insights from it?
I mean, I think it's an important balance to strike because I think as much as AI can be a game changer from a productivity perspective, you want to make sure that people trust the technology, right? And if as a company you're a bit too eager to roll something out without doing the right vetting, then you might be in a situation where something goes wrong and people are going to lose faith in you and what you offer and what you do. And that's not the kind of situation that you want to find yourself in. So I think it's very critical not only to think about patient consent, but other dimensions of responsible AI, fairness, transparency, explainability, safety, security. There's a lot of different things to talk about. And I think companies do need to strike that balance. And I mean, you look at the data, public trust in AI is very low in the United States and a lot of other Western nations. And I think businesses responsibly rolling out the technology is going to be very important to actually getting people to buy into the tech and to changing some of those perspectives and opinions around a little bit more tangibly.
Yeah, like that makes a lot of sense. Um, think we may have time for one more question here. So I'm going to jump into my bag here, but we touched on this briefly. But in terms of in another topic that we are addressing, but for many of us, the gains in productivity, that's one of the biggest appeals of AI in terms of business applications. I know for myself as well as my teams, we leverage AI quite a bit for a lot of the work that we're doing for us to be able to do more with less in terms of time and internal resources. Um, the there was that stat that you shared, or that specific slide that I was alluding to earlier, just in terms of specific functions and industries where AI was able to significantly enhance in some instances, the performance of folks in different industries. I talked about consulting earlier specifically, but in terms of just future outlook. I know we alluded to the McKinsey predictions, but for you personally, what do you see as the ideal balance of AI versus human productivity and resources in the workforce? Do you see this ever tipping towards just AI and having businesses focus purely on efficiency if they see that they have significant gains in productivity and that I guess either the perception of the quality of the output ends up being roughly zero. I'm trying to remember exactly what the chart,
Yeah.
the column to the far right was that customer service was near zero, right? But if it continues in that direction, it becomes much more relevant to other industries and other business areas. It is I guess this is more of to put it in plain English. will the AI eventually take over? Are we eventually going to be just AI bots and agents talking to each other, selling to each other, marketing to each other, essentially consulting with each other? Or is that so far into the future that it's still science fiction at this point?
I mean, it's hard to predict the future. I mean, I would like to still think it's science fiction. I mean, I think the technology needs to get better, also a bit more kind of usable. I mean, it could do a lot of great things, but you know, historically we've had a lot of technologies that have saved us time and we find th other things to do. And I think that's very true. You're seeing this in a lot of spaces now. Yeah, I think it's going to depend on the task and depend on the function, but AI can do a lot, but there's also a lot that it can't do. And I think that the smarter organizations are going to be the ones that are going to prioritize augmenting rather than automating, that are going to think to themselves, how can we use AI with humans to kind of do things that we couldn't do before? And that's kind of a thought that I tell to all my businesses that I work with.
Right. It's I'm sure that a lot of folks are glad that I know that that was a pretty light prediction, modest prediction, but yeah, I think we're all hoping that it continues to be science fiction moving forward, just in terms of how far it tilts towards AI
Yeah.
doing our jobs. Um, we're at uh, we're at about time. I do want to thank Nestor once again for joining us, and it's always a really exciting and just thought-provoking conversation to have you, especially since you and your team are in the weeds, and this is a report that you all have been doing for several years now. Looking forward to next year and working with you on this again, and then obviously likely having a webinar as well where we could discuss some of the findings there. I'm sure that in the next year there are going to be significant changes and more exciting things for us to be able to talk about. But any parting words from you, Nestor, before we wrap up today's webinar?
I mean, I think the technology is here, and I would just encourage everybody to embrace that reality and, make themselves a part of the conversation. I think that's what we believe in at the Index, helping people make those decisions. And I think we could build a future that's very AI positive, and we want to do that at the AI Index.
Awesome. Well, we definitely look forward to developments as well as new findings. I know outside of the AI index report, there's quite a bit more information that Stanford High has on their website as well. So just promoting that on Nestor's behalf, that even though the report is released annually, that there's always more information that gets added to that site. So again, thank you so much to Nestor. For the folks who may have missed parts of the webinar, we will be making this available on demand before the end of this week. So expect to see an email from us with that. We also have webinars that we have coming up over the next couple of months that you'll be able to find in our events and webinar section on our site. So keep an eye out for that. We've got more exciting stuff. I'm not sure whether or not we'll be able to top how exciting this webinar in particular and this topic was, but we will do our best over here. But again, thank you all for joining. And until next year, maybe sooner. Nestor, we appreciate your time and thanks again.
Thanks for having me. Take care.